Okay, good evening, students. We're going to start by going over what is a primary source. So if you prepared for this lesson, then you would have emailed me what you think is a primary source, an example, and what you thought was a secondary source, and an example. But what we're going to do now is just kind of go over what it is exactly. So primary sources are firsthand, okay? They're original records of either political, economic, artistic, scientific, social, or intellectual thoughts and achievements um, of specific historical periods. They're produced by the people who participated in and witnessed the past. They offer a variety of points of view, so they might be have differing opinions. People might be seeing a different perspective of the same event. Um, they can be found anywhere, okay, in a home, a government archive, but the important thing to remember is that they were used or created by someone with first-hand experience. Okay, they were actually there. So some examples of that are um, not just documents and written records, okay, but they can be first person accounts, documents, physical artifacts, scientific data. Uh, let's see, can be audio, like oral histories or memoirs, interviews or music, images, photographs, videos, film, um, art. They can be objects like clothes, tools, gravestones, inventions, weapons, census data, weather records, and text like letters, diaries, original documents, maps, laws, recipes. Okay, so there's a lot of different examples there. How do they differ from secondary sources? Primary sources are the original records created. Okay, we went over that. First-hand witness. Secondary sources are documents, text, images, and objects about an event created by someone who referenced or who used the primary source for their information. Okay, so a textbook would be a really good example of a secondary source. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go over some examples and we're going to see if you can guess which it is. Just a second. This one. Okay, so the first example, I was watching ESPN and one of the reporters said he had heard good reviews about a new sports movie. When he talks about the movie, what is he? Is he a primary source or a secondary source? And you can see bolded here, kind of gives you a clue. He is a secondary source. Okay, he had heard good reviews about the movie. He didn't actually go see the movie. So it's secondhand. All right, let's try this one. I found a letter to one of my friends in the locker room after school the other day. I know it's private, but I want to read it. What is the letter? Okay, so a letter, think about it. Okay, a letter is a primary source. Okay, it was first hand. Somebody wrote it. My friends and I found an old wedding dress in our attic. My father said it belonged to my grandmother. What is the dress? Okay, think about that. Remember, primary sources can be objects too, like clothes. So yeah, the wedding dress is a primary source. At school, we use textbooks to learn about the history of the United States. When we use textbooks, what are we using? Okay, we're using secondary source. Remember, textbooks reference primary sources. So they're written secondhand. They're not written during the time in history that they occurred. but they do reference primary sources in them. You might see a document, an original document in a textbook. You might see original paintings in a textbook. So textbooks could contain pieces of a primary sources, but overall the textbook is a secondary source. Okay, the next one. I like to read People magazine. I really like the articles written by others about Hollywood actors. When I read these stories, what am I reading? Okay, so it's articles written by others about Hollywood actors. So those are secondary sources. All right, let's try another one. My mom has CDs of my grandparents telling stories about when they were kids. We love to listen to these at family gatherings. What are we listening to? Okay, so you're listening to grandparents telling stories about themselves when they were kids. Okay, that's not secondhand. That's the primary source is telling stories. So those are primary sources. That's called an oral history too. When I'm doing homework for U.S. government, I read the commentaries by Supreme Court justices on landmark cases. What am I reading? Okay, you're reading a primary source because the Supreme Court justices actually commented on their landmark cases. So they're firsthand. The Supreme Court justices were there and they wrote about them or commented on them. My friend Tim said I should read a book that he really liked. He told me about it. It sounds really good. When Tim talks about the book, what is he? Okay, so he's talking about a book secondhand. So he is a secondary source. When I was at summer camp a few years ago, I found an arrowhead. I did research and found out it has been made by the Cherokee Indians. What is my arrowhead? Okay, remember, if it was made by, it's an actual object made by a Cherokee Indian, then it's a primary source. I'm writing an essay on George Washington for my U.S. history class. I used articles from Wikipedia and another encyclopedia. What am I using? Okay, first of all, you should never use Wikipedia for an academic paper, but encyclopedias in general are secondary sources. They're like textbooks. They're written referencing a primary source, but they are not a primary source. And that's it for that. Now let me explain the assignment. Oops. Okay, so you're going to find the assignment for this in lesson 1.1, Thinking Like a Historian. And if you go down to primary versus secondary sources assignment, that's where you'll find what you're going to do with this information. So now what I want you to do is identify two primary sources and two secondary sources that accurately depict the significance of the event, and we're going to use the crossing of the Mayflower as the event. Okay, so you can use these websites to help you. You can submit your sources by listing them and identifying whether they are primary or secondary and how you know that. Okay, my advanced students are going to be, they have an additional assignment to this. It'll be at the end over here. So if you're in the advanced U.S. history, there is more to this assignment, so read carefully on your course page. Okay, and let me know if you have any questions.